The morning of Sunday, July 3rd, 2022 started off like many other on the slopes of the Marmolada Mountain in the Italian Alps, but would end in tragedy. Being the hottest day ever recorded on the face of the mountain at 10 degrees Celsius or 50 degrees Fahrenheit, the climbers on that fateful Sunday morning had no idea what was in store for them. The mountain, which hosts the largest glacier in the Italian Alps, was primed for climbing, and that's what was taking place. Climbing groups loaded across the several kilometer-long trail and didn't know the disaster would hit around midday as tons of snow and ice plummeted down the slopes and through the several groups. Today, we will tell the story of the Marmolada Serac Collapse. Having a long history of alpinism, the European Alps will always have a reputation for risk and reward. Hosting some of the most legendary routes in the world, such as the Eiger and the Matterhorn. This makes the Marmolada Mountain in Italy one that flies under the radar. But in 2022, the Marmolada Mountain was one of the most heavily trafficked climbing routes in the region. Seeing hundreds of groups a month, the climb to the top is relatively intermediate. But glaciologists knew that any disaster involving the serac that lies just below its summit would lead to fatalities. The glacier on top, being almost a half a kilometer wide and tens of meters thick, was and is a ticking time bomb. Hosting several large seracs on top of the glacier, these large deposits of ice pose a massive danger to anyone who may be underneath them. As widely reported in the months leading up to July 3rd, the mountain and its glaciers was experiencing some of the hottest temperatures it had seen since it was inhabited. Over the course of the last century, temperatures in the European Alps have increased by around 2 degrees Celsius or 3.6 degrees Fahrenheit, about double what the rest of the world has experienced. And in the summer of 2022, it only got worse. A mountain guide who has worked on and around the Marmolada as a guide for 40 years and typically climbs the Marmolada a few times a year, both in summer and in the winter, said he has witnessed the glacier retreat unbelievably in this short period of time. As a rough visual estimate, it's probably smaller by around 500 meters. But what has changed a lot in the last few years is the amount of snow. Early in my career, I remember climbing on snow in August. Nowadays, there is almost no snow in July. Even worse in 2022. Due to a minimal winter snowfall, it's almost only ice. This lack of snow cover on the ice accelerates its rate of warming. The heatwave starting in May and continuing into July brought record-breaking June temperatures across the continent, with central and southern areas of Italy hitting up to 40 degrees Celsius or 105 degrees Fahrenheit. The glacier sitting on top of the Marmolada felt the same heat. Sitting at just under 3,343 meters, the mountain is considered to be the queen of the Dolomites, as it's the highest summit in the whole range. But sadly, the rising temperatures over the past 100 years has taken its toll. Losing more than 80% of its volume over the last 72 years, the glacier, also known as a serac, has been getting weaker and weaker with each decade that passes. The danger of this heat was so apparent that the climbing route of the Marmolada was closed for several weeks leading up to July due to safety concerns. Estimating the glacier won't survive another 15 years with these temperatures, it is expected that pieces of the serac will shed and fall down the slopes below. Scientists can usually estimate when the glacier will lose parts of its ice, but what we saw on July 3rd, 2022 was not expected nor planned for. While several groups totaling between 20 and 30 people made their way up the mountain, a large piece of ice mixed with debris would find itself dislodged from the glacier and plummeted on the climbers below. The section of ice that fell was estimated to be around 200 meters long, 60 meters wide, and 30 meters thick. It took less than 20 seconds for it to fall all the way to the base of the mountain, wiping out one of the groups below and a few buildings at the base of the mountain. The ice and debris collapsed just after 2 p.m., and quickly rescue crews were on the scene. Things did not look good for the group below. The 2 football field wide collapse left 8 dead and 2 others missing. With the expected death toll at 11, this is one of the largest glacier collapse incidents in the Alps. Among those confirmed to be dead are 2 Italian mountain guides, while the rest were recreational climbers along for the climb. Many others reported having minor injuries, but in total, with the size of the collapse in mind and the number of people on the mountain that day, it truly could have been worse. Matthias Huss, a glaciologist and head of the Swiss Glacier Monitoring Network Switzerland, explained, "Bad luck was also involved. It could have happened in the middle of the night instead of a busy Sunday morning." Huss further explained the importance of acknowledging the long-term impact of rising temperatures when considering the cause of the collapse. In my opinion, people are quick to make the heat wave to collapse connection. Of course, the particular weather conditions played a certain role, but it was the retreat of the glacier over the last decades and years, driven by climate change, that brought it into the unstable situation. The hot weather that day was just the final trigger. Going on to say, in general, ice break-off events can be predicted, but only if there is a known danger beforehand and extensive monitoring is installed. Hearst further explained, neither of those things were present in the case of the Marmolada, which ultimately led to disaster. Several mountain guides were unhappy with the online criticism sent the way of the guides who decided to climb that day. Some online commenters criticized the deceased mountain guides who took the clients on the mountain on the day of the accident, sharing a video of running subglacial water taken and posted online by a local hut guardian the day before the collapse. One mountain guide said, "Unfortunately, a lot of negative things have been written, and especially by a lot of incompetent people. I firmly believe that the accident that happened on Sunday could not have been foreseen by anyone." In response to the incident, the Italian authorities have taken several measures to prevent similar incidences from happening in the future. For example, they have increased the frequency of inspections on the Marmolada Glacier and have installed monitoring devices to detect any signs of instability. They have also increased the size of the exclusion zone around the area and have increased the penalties for those who violate the restrictions. As mountains continue to present increased objective dangers through climate change, such as serac collapses, avalanches, rockfalls, and flooding, guides and climbers alike are being forced to choose their objectives carefully. In the aftermath of the collapse, 2 suspended seracs have been left exposed, which are now under continuous monitoring. Over the 6 months directly after the incident, local authorities in the region have closed a section of road and multiple paths leading high up on the Marmolada, and one house was evacuated as a precaution. The potential for further collapses and the impact of safety restrictions on the local tourism and livelihoods during the peak summer seasons are a growing concern for those living and working on the mountain and in the neighboring villages. In terms of further glacial retreat, the Marmolada's elevation at 3,343 meters places it at a high-risk zone, as a team of researchers have predicted that most, if not all, glaciers below 3,500 meters in the European Alps will have completely melted by the year 2050. While this tragedy is simply a result of climate change, we should expect to see further glacial collapses in the Alps and other large mountain ranges in the next few decades as the Earth continues to warm. Scientists will continue to monitor and provide safety updates for all of these glaciated mountains that see recreational climbers in order to avoid disasters like this in the future. Rest in peace to those 11 individuals who lost their lives that day. That is the story of the Marmolada Serac Collapse. If you made it this far, please consider liking, commenting, and subscribing. And if you want to hear more scary, fascinating stories, check out this one, which you might like.